The Northwest Territories. Stanley awoke to a poke in the ribs. The sun was shining brightly and the wind had nearly stopped. "We're coming down," Nick shouted fast. Stanley looked down. Nick was right. They were hurtling toward the frozen landscape at a dangerous speed. 3, 2, 1, roll, Stanley cried. He arched his back even more like a parachute, and they crashed softly to the ground, tumbling head over heels through snow and brush. When they gathered themselves enough to sit up, they were stunned to find a man in a coat with a huge fur collar and towering over them. "An Eskimo?" Nick breathed. "That's Inuit," the man corrected him, smiling. "We're native people. I'm a Tulagag." He extended one hand to each boy and pulled them to their feet easily. Beside them, a furry dog was yapping and dancing around. "This is Amarak. It means wolf, but he's very friendly. He watched you fall from the sky. He's never seen birds as big as you." Nick straightened up. "I'm bigger than he is." Tulak frowned a little. "Well, no matter. You both look how frozen. Follow me." Nick and Stanley followed the Inuit man across the frozen tundra and into a little wooden house. "Hey, you don't live in an igloo?" Nick asked. Tulak rolled his eyes and laughed a hearty laugh. "There's a lot you don't know about my culture," the man said. "Come inside, and you will see that we are very modern." Inside the house, Stanley and Nick were grateful to warm themselves by a roaring fire. Tulak introduced the boy to his wife, his grandmother, and a half dozen children, who were scampering about, passing around bowls of caribou stew. The boys ate as Tulak told stories about his people. Then everyone was eager to hear the story of how Nick and Stanley had arrived. "You traveled so far," Tulak's grandmother marveled. "You floated right over the Rocky Mountains and into the Northern Territories." "I steered," boasted Nick. Tulak's wife patted Stanley's hand. "Your family must be worried. Here, use our phone to call them, to let them know you are safe." Stanley called the ski resort, eager to hear his parents' voice and to tell Arthur all about his adventure. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said. "The lamb chop family checked out yesterday." Nick grabbed the phone. "How about my family? Connect me to Dr. Dave's room. It's the VIP suite." "Sorry," said the receptionist. "Dr. Dave and his party checked out yesterday also." Stanley and Nick were too stunned to speak. Tulip turned to his wife and said something in Inuit. Then he put his hand on Stanley's shoulder. "We must visit the shaman now. Come." Stanley and Nick left with Tulip. Still quite upset, why would their families have left without them? And where could they have gone? "The shaman is wise," Tulip told them as they traveled across the village. "He will have an answer." But Nick and Stanley were not reassured. In fact, they were worried. They barely even noticed that they traveled over a frozen river, over a bridge of ice. Where were their families? At last, they came to a small ancient hut. Tulik ducked inside and waved the boys to follow him. In the dim light from an oil lamp, the boys could see that the walls hung with animal furs and weaving and ancient artifacts. Suddenly, one of the furs, huge and with a monstrous mask on top, leaped to life and came straight from them. The monster pulled off his mask to reveal a very tiny, wrinkled old Inuit man. He hugged Tulik, and the two spoke for a moment in their language. Tulik pointed to the boys, and the shaman turned. His eyes widened when he saw Stanley's shape. He walked all around him, eyeing him closely from all angles. The shaman seemed so impressed and respectful that Stanley didn't feel a bit embarrassed by his curiosity. Next, the shaman handed a skin drum to Tulik. Tulik began to beat it, and the shaman began to chant and dance around the room. Faster and faster he whirled around. He whirled, almost as if he was in a trance. Finally, he spun to a stop and seemed to come back to himself. He smiled broadly without a tooth in his head and said something to Tulik. He says, "You boys are going to make a great journey together," Tulik translated. "You will go to great falling waters. There, something will happen that will bind you to each other for life, like brothers." "The great falling waters?" asked Nick. "Where's that?" The shaman reached into his pouch, wore around his neck, and pulled out a worn and creased postcard. He showed it to Nick. He showed it to the boys. "Niagara Falls," Stanley cried. "I've heard of that. But how far away is it? Near Toronto and Ontario?" "Many miles away," answered Tulik. "Thousands. Canada is a very large country." Stanley and Nick exchanged looks. Two boys on foot with no money could never travel that far. Later that night, after a satisfying meal of dried fish and boiled walrus, the boys sat on the steps outside Tulik's home. "Normally, I would just mail myself home," Stanley said. But I don't think I should leave you here." Nick nodded. "Besides," he said, "we don't know that there'll be anyone at our homes when we got there." "I don't know what to do," Stanley said. "The shaman said we're supposed to make the journey together. Tulik said there's a dog sled to Calgary, where his cousin lives, but that's just a short part of the trip." Both boys fell silent then, looking down at the frozen ground, discouraged. After a while, though, Stanley, not being the kind of boy to give in to discouragement, looked up. And then he gasped in disbelief. The night sky was shimmering with iridescent lights. Neon greens, pinks, and yellows danced across the entire horizon. "The Northern Lights, Nick," Stanley said at last. "It's a sign. If the whole sky can light up like that, I guess you and I can make our way to Niagara Falls somehow." Nick and Stanley shook hands. "We'll do it," they declared, like brothers.